Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Emerging Technologies Conference being hosted by the Singularity Institute for Artificial Intelligence and Scivestor. My name is Jonas Lamis, and I am the founder of Scivestor, which is an industry research firm. Conveniently, I'm also a director of the Singularity Institute, responsible for partnerships. And I'm really pleased to have you all turn out here for our first Emerging Technologies workshop. This is the third year that we've run the Singularity Summit here in the Bay Area. But this is the first time we've tried to host a pre-event for it. And as you can see from the folks around you, the turnout has been fantastic. We thought we'd be lucky to get 50 people to come to this, and then we ended up being oversubscribed with about 150 people here in the room. So, fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for coming here. Hopefully, we'll deliver some value for you today to get your money's worth, and you'll learn some things about companies that are going to change the world. So, I'm now going to move into spend the next 20 minutes or so just on some general observations about the world of accelerating technology. I want to cover off on three areas that really excite me and the folks at Scivestor. In particular, I want to talk about brains, I want to talk about bots, and I want to talk about bodies. And a lot of the thoughts hopefully will be taken more in detail into the panels that we're discussing about today. One thing I would say is before we kind of dive into the future, I like to start in the past. And in particular, I want to talk about the tale of Pal Paisam. So if you want to figure out the future, I suggest maybe making a detour to southern India. If you're in the southern India state of Kerala, you can visit a village called Ambalapuzha. And Ambalapuzha is famous for two things. It's famous for its Sri Krishna temple, and it's famous for it's rice pudding, or Pal Paisam. Now, the legend goes that many, many years ago, the Lord Krishna himself visited the temple of Ambalapuzha, and when he was there, he challenged the king of the realm to a game of chess. Now, the king was a big chess fan and always took challengers and pretty much always won. So when the Lord Krishna showed up, he was disguised as a sage. And the king told the sage, name a prize, any prize you'd like from my kingdom if you're able to defeat me. Well, the sage said he was a simple man and all he wanted was a few grains of rice. In fact, he suggested that they use the chessboard as a medium for meting out the reward should he somehow defeat the king. He said, I'd like you just to put 1 grain of rice on the first square of the chessboard and then double it to 2 grains of rice on the second square, and then 4 on the third, and 8 on the fourth, and so forth and so on, until all 64 squares of the chessboard have rice on them. And the king said, well, that's a pretty simple reward. Is there nothing greater in my kingdom you'd like? And of course, the sage, being a simple man, said, that should be sufficient. So the game progressed, and as you can imagine in tales like these, it didn't take very long for the sage to defeat the king. King called forth to the royal granary to have a bag of rice brought forward, and he dipped his hand inside and had a handful of rice grains, and took the first grain and he put it on the first square, and then he took 2 and put it on the second, and then he took 4 and put it on the third, and so forth and so on. And he wasn't really too concerned about it. 8 on the next, 16, 32, 64, so forth and so on, until he got to the 20th square. Because when he got to the 20th square, he had to place 1,000,000 grains of rice on the 20th square. And by the time he got all the way to the 40th square, he would have had to put 1,000,000,000,000 grains of rice on the 40th square. And if, in fact, he had tried to keep placing rice on the chessboard until he got to the 64th square, he would have had to put 18 billion grains of rice on that square. That's 210 billion tons of rice. That's more rice that was in all of the kingdoms of India. Well, it was at that point in time where the Lord Krishna revealed his true identity to the king and told him that, in fact, he did not need to pay his debt immediately, but instead he could pay it over time. And so that is why when you travel to the temples of southern India, you will still find the pilgrims feasting on rice pudding or pal paisam to this day. Still, the debt is being repaid. Now, that's an interesting story, or fable, if you will, but I have my own personal theory, which is that the Lord Krishna actually made a more recent visit. In fact, he stopped by Silicon Valley not too long ago. And he visited, I think it was probably 1964, where he caught up with young Gordon Moore. And of course, it was in '64 that Moore wrote an article that has become very famous to all of us, where ultimately he postulated the underpinnings for what has become Moore's Law. And Intel, obviously, is a great example of a company that has harnessed this power of accelerating technology, much like the story of the rice. You know, the Intel i8081 processor, I think it was, from i8088 from 1981, had 29,000 transistors on it. You look at where we are today, we've got 820 million transistors on our chips, and Intel says the next version that they've got out there is going to be 2 billion. I think a lot of people in society are starting to get nervous, sort of like the king when he's trying to place, you know, 1 million grains of rice on a square on the chessboard, with where we are in the acceleration of technology. Ray Kurzweil, who many of you have heard speak before, and all of you will hear tomorrow, assuming you're attending the summit, has been a huge proponent of the law of accelerating technology. This chart, of course, is courtesy of his research, and you can get it at kurzweilai.net. Ray has identified, you know, these continuing paradigms of technology growth, exponential technology growth, starting all the way back in the beginning of last century through to the integrated circuit world where we are today. And one of the premises of this is that it's not just Moore's Law that is contributing to this dramatic increase in power of capability in our society, but we're on a kind of a never-ending path here of accelerating capability, and there's going to be a sixth paradigm and a seventh paradigm that will come along to supplant Moore's Law when it actually runs out of steam. Now, if you talk to the scientists out there at IBM and Intel and everywhere else, I think we find that a lot of folks have designs on the next 10 years, the next 15 years of exponential growth. So it's going to be very interesting, of course. So what I want to do now is just really touch on 3 areas that I think are interesting, that are harnessing this power of Moore's Law, and tell you about a few concepts within these areas that are very interesting. The first one is brains, right? So brains is a very general term in the context I'm using it here today. Computers are getting smart. What is the future of smart computers? What are we seeing today that is going to make it easier for us to use the internet? What are we seeing in the labs today that ultimately will allow us to replicate the thought of different kinds of animals and simulate those in computers, and all kinds of interesting things that are going on? I just want to touch on 2 of those in a summary fashion. The first one I want to touch on is the future of the internet, in my opinion. You know, today's internet, Web 2.0, social networking, all that great stuff, is really the same paradigm that we've had since the dawn of the internet age. You know, it's about searching for information, finding information manually, and then doing something about it. Well, I think we're on the verge of a revolution in where the internet is heading, being driven by semantic technologies. And we're going to learn a lot more about this from our semantic panel that's up next. But I've mocked up what I call my Google Agent desktop here, my Google Agent website. You can see this is the year 2012 here, copyright from Google. And it looks pretty similar to what we have today, except that the search button obviously is replaced by a big do it button. And when I type in a sentence like schedule a date with my wife for tomorrow night, the agents of 2012 are going to know what that means, and they're going to do it for me. They're going to know contextually who I am and who Catherine is, and they're going to know semantically what it means to schedule a date. And they're going to know things about our schedules like, since we've got 4 kids, we're going to have a babysitter if the date that you're going to schedule is taking us out to dinner. So interface with our babysitters, our preferred babysitters agents, and find the one that's most appropriate for this activity that we're doing, and so forth and so on. I think that we're going to see the automation of this deciding process. And as a result of that, I think the biggest shockwave of this over the next couple of years, in my opinion, is going to be what I would call the death of advertising. Traditional advertising that we have on the web today. Google AdWords, I think, is a dead technology in the next 5 years. And it's because we're going to start creating ways to teach the computer to do the things that we want it to do through these kind of agent-based technologies, and they're going to behave based on trust that we have enabled them to act around, and also around our trusted network. So you've got your friends out there on Facebook and so forth and so on. Soon, the people that you really trust are going to be able to help influence how your agents are behaving online and so forth and so on. And what that's going to mean is that you're going to spend a lot less time looking at AdWords or looking at banner ads and being influenced by those kinds of things. So I think this is going to be a major driver for change in the Valley over the next 5 to 10 years. And I'm very excited for our semantic panel this morning to talk more about this potentially in detail, as well as other semantic concepts that are out there. A little bit further out, we can talk about how your brain is going to get integrated in with a computer. Human-computer interaction, obviously, is a really interesting topic, but there are some amazing research projects going on today that talk about your brain and your brain in a computer. These slides that you see up here actually are not human brains, but they are, the first one is a high-resolution scan of a very small segment of the neocortex of a fruit fly. And this is a simulation of that same neocortex sitting in a visualization of it in an IBM computer in Switzerland, I think called the Blue Brain Project. So amazing things that are going on in this space. In this lab in Switzerland, what they've got is a massively parallel supercomputer, latest and greatest chips, 6,000 parallel processors in one room in their data center. And then in the room next to it, they've got what they call the wet lab. And in the wet lab, they've got this robot that is essentially dissecting this neocortical column of a fruit fly brain at the molecular level, right? It's creating these really small slices through it, and then they're observing the neurons and the synapses, and they probe it with a little electricity, and they see how the synapses behave and how the dendrites intertwine and so forth and so on, and they capture that information, and then they send it over to their simulation. So over the course of several months and years, they built up a simulation in this computer of a very small section of this fruit fly brain. It was about 10,000 neurons, 20 million synaptic connections. And when they were done building it in the simulation, they said, okay, let's see if it works. Let's see if it flies, so to speak. And so they simulated electrical impulses to the simulation, just like the real fruit fly brain would get from its body. And the output of the simulation was behaviors that were exactly the same as the real fruit fly would do, right? So think of it like, if you're into sci-fi stuff, thinking of it as taking just, a little piece of consciousness, right, out of a fruit fly brain and putting it in a computer. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, as you can imagine, somebody who had a fleet of airplanes that they fly around the deserts and mountains of Afghanistan looking for terrorists, autonomous, airplanes without pilots in it, might want to have some of that kind of capability built into it, right? Right now, all those Predator drones and the Global Hawks and all those things that the Department of Defense has that you've probably seen online, which are the pilotless airplanes, are controlled by pilots who are sitting in a room somewhere halfway around the world. But if you could take some of the rules that a fruit fly knows about how to fly and avoid obstacles and things like that, and stick that into the brain, into the computer that's flying that airplane, all of a sudden you don't need to have all those resources on hand all the time to fly them. Or maybe you get fancier and you say, let's go after the part of the fruit fly brain that is focused on being attracted to sweetness, right? And then let's reprogram that sweetness part to make it attracted to something else that we want to track, like suspicious behavior, right? And then we put that into the Predator drone, and all of a sudden we have autonomous airplanes that are targeting behaviors that they've learned from a fruit fly. Pretty interesting. Now, the guys at IBM talk about scaling this up to the human brain size, and I think that they've said, if you wanted to do that today, it would take 3 data centers the size of all of Google's data centers combined to hold the kind of data that you would get at this level of resolution from a human brain, and it would cost billions and billions of dollars just for the energy necessary to power it for a year. But on the other hand, when you apply Moore's law to that processing power, they think in 10 to 12 years, all of that processing power will be on a $1,000 chip. Right? So things are changing quickly, and this space is going to be very interesting going forward. A couple other quick areas I want to cover off on in the robot space, for example. Two areas that really have interested me over the last year. One is the area of autonomous vehicles. We've had these great things called the DARPA Grand Challenge that you know of, potentially, where we've had competitions being put on by the Department of Defense, where companies have built cars that drive themselves, basically, along these obstacle courses through the desert. This is a big one called Terramax by the Oshkosh Manufacturing Company. And this heavy vehicle here, it's on a racetrack out through the desert where it's navigating around a turn here, and there's nobody driving it. There's no remote control. There's nobody sitting in the cab or anything. It's just got this big mass of sensors here sitting on the front grille, and GPS and dead reckoning and all these other things. And it's trying to determine where the edge of the road is so it doesn't run into the cliff on this side or fall off on that side. And that white chase car behind it, that's a bunch of nervous guys with their hands on an emergency stop button in case Terramax decides to take a wrong turn. But we've had 3 grand challenges over the last 5 years, 2 out in the desert, and then in 2007 there was the Urban Challenge, which was actually in a simulated city environment. And what those grand challenges have done is dramatically accelerate the technologies that are emerging for vehicle autonomy. Sensor technologies have accelerated tremendously because of this. In fact, on the robotics panel this afternoon, one of our speakers from a company called Velodyne has created a sensing technology that was adopted by 7 of the 11 finalists in the last Grand Challenge. And so there's a lot of really cool things that are coming to bear in this space. Cars drive themselves. I think technically we're going to see that capability there within the next decade. Realistically, probably not, because there are bigger issues, political and insurance and liability issues that need to be solved. And until the insurance companies decide it's better for you not to be driving your car than for you to be driving your car, we'll still be in the middle of that decision-making process, although there will be times when it'll feel like your car is driving itself in certain circumstances. Another area that's really fascinating in the robotic space is robo-medicus, or robotic surgery technologies that have been emerging over the last 5 years or so. This robot here is called Da Vinci. It's made by a company called Intuitive Surgical, which is a publicly traded high flyer. And basically, this robot is performing a surgery here, and the doctor's the guy with the blue scrubs sitting back over there. He's looking into a stereoscopic, magnified 3D vision system, and he has these little controllers that gives him many degrees of freedom and manipulation for these tools. Plus, he has a voice recognition system that he can command tool changes and injections and things like that with it. Of course, he doesn't need to be sitting there. He could be sitting halfway around the world, obviously. But the results of these clinical trials for these robots have been fantastic. You know, dramatic reductions in loss of blood, healing time is reduced tremendously, because these are very non-invasive surgeries for heart surgery, kidney surgery, thyroid, things like that. And you're starting to see hospitals all over the world adopting these technologies, which is very interesting. Also on the robotics panel this afternoon, one of our speakers is in this space, in the software area. Lastly, we'll wrap up with some thoughts on the body. This goes back to, this is a capture out of Wired magazine a year ago or so. They did an article about Ray Kurzweil, and this is his daily pill regimen. Of course, Ray is, you know, he's trying to re-engineer his body chemistry so that he can, in his model, live long enough to live forever, basically. He's trying to prolong his lifetime with, technologies that are available today so that new innovations will come along and help him live longer. And I'm sure he'll probably touch on that tomorrow as well. Two areas that I think are pretty interesting. One is in this world of understanding your DNA and your chromosomes and things like that. You know, it wasn't too long ago when the Human Genome Project was going on, and there was a multi-billion-dollar budget to reverse engineer the first DNA sequences for humans. And the costs have been falling just as quickly as Moore's Law has been accelerating them, accelerating the power that's driving them down. Today, a company here in the Valley called 23andme.com will provide you with your genome for, I think the price now is it's like $400 or $250. I think they just cut it again. You sign up at their site, 23andMe, and they'll send you a little vial that you can fill up with spit, send it back into them, and then they'll give you a website where you can explore your genetics and you can see where you came from and what ancestors you're related to from around the world, and they'll also tell you what some of your markers are for potential diseases that you might have in the future and how you're related to other people in your family if they do it as well. I think that notion of having our genetics available to us is going to be very profound on the healthcare industry. It's already starting in the sense that Congress passed a law this past year where you couldn't discriminate against people based on their genetic data. And I think we're going to see your genetic profile being part of your copay in the next 10 years or so. And you may want to actually do it because shortly after that, you're going to have the world of designer drugs focused on trying to provide medicine for specific individuals or much smaller classes of people who can be, micro-targeted with certain kinds of drugs. So I've got to wrap up, but in the whole scheme of things, I've got my normal distribution here of what could happen in the future. And we tend to think of the 68% of activities happen in the middle most of the time. However, accelerating technology has the potential to drive outcomes out towards the tails of this distribution. They could be good outcomes, they could be bad outcomes. A lot of the work that the Singularity Institute and its like-minded organizations here in the Valley and elsewhere are focused on are trying to understand this more effectively and communicate what the opportunities and risks are associated with accelerating technologies. So think about these kinds of activities. Think about, during the course of today and tomorrow, how you can get involved with your companies, with these organizations and so forth and so on to help try and guide us, hopefully, to a good outcome for many of these things rather than some of the worst things that could happen. So connections, certainly I'd love to connect with you all one way or another online or in person over the next couple days. Here's a bunch of places you can find me. Scivestor.com is my company, as I mentioned, and we have research out there. I was chastised at our tweet up last night for it not all being free. Some of it actually costs money. We'll be reviewing that. Maybe we'll try and make some of it more free as we can. I got to pay the bills somehow, though. And my email on Twitter, a couple blogs that I post to, Robot Central and Lamis is my personal blog, and then we have a video podcast out there as well. So that's that. I'm going to ask the Semantic web panel to come on up now and have a seat. And while they're doing that, I'll entertain any questions that folks might have, if there are any.